Okay, so now we're going to look at loops. And loops in programming are basically any way to either loop through an array to be able to do a particular action to every item in an array, or even just to do something an X number of times, to do something as long as a condition exists. So we're testing for a particular condition and we keep doing this action over and over and over until our conditions are met. So the couple different ways, let's look at for each to start off with. And for each is what we use when we want to loop through an array. So we've got our array up here, and we say for each, and then in here we specify the what our array is, which is food as, and then we can say each one is going to have key and value. And these are just names that we made up, and I'm using them for simplicity here. But we could also say anything we want. We could say foods and veggies or something like that if we want to. We're just saying, okay, each time for each one of these arrays or items in the array, we're going to need a variable to reference the key and one to reference the peaches. So anything we do inside of this for each function, it is going to occur for each item in this array. So if we're doing food, we've got fruit, vegetables, dessert, meat, and appetizer. So we've got about 5 different items there. And so this is going to loop through 5 times, and for each one of those. So the first time it loops, key is going to be equal to fruit, value is going to be equal to peaches. And the next time it loops through, or the next time it runs, it's going to have a key of vegetable and a value of potato, and on and on. So we might say maybe we're just wanting to print them out to the screen. And we can use the echo to do that. And so we can say echo key, and then I'm going to concatenate a string here, which we use the period to say we're going to concatenate several strings together. So we say the key is a string, it's a value of fruit, and then we're going to include a dash, a couple spaces and a dash in between them, and then we're going to echo out the value as well. So we've basically got 3 strings here that we've merged together into one, and then we're going to echo that out. And so if we actually ran this, then we'd be able to see what it did. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so you can see it did that for each one of these. Fruit-peaches, vegetable-potato, and that does what we're looking for. Obviously these are kind of all mashed together. If we wanted to, we could add an HTML value in there at the end to tell it to break to a new line. And then we have each one of those on a new line. So that's what we can do with for each. If we wanted to just complete an action X number of times, say we wanted to do something 100 times in a row, then we could use the for, and it's going to take 3 arguments. So it's going to take our starting value, so we could say I equals 1, and then it's going to want to know how long we're supposed to keep doing this. So we can say we want it to continue executing as long as I is less than 6, for instance. Well, let's say 100. And then we're going to say, okay, each time it runs, we want to increase I by a certain amount. So in this case, we want it to increase by 1. So we'll say I equals I plus 1. This could also be shortened down, and we could just say I plus plus, and that's going to increment, as long as I is a number, it's going to increment it by 1. And so now we have whatever we put in here. Let's say we just wanted to echo I. Then it's going to keep echoing out I 100 times. So if we wanted to format out a little bit better so we can see what's going on. If I switch back here, we're going to see that, and then we're going to see it counting. 1, 2, 3, all the way down to 99. And the reason it only goes to 99 is because we said that it should continue executing as long as it's less than 100, not actually 100. So that's how you use a for loop. And then you also have a while loop. And this functions very similar, except all you put is a condition in here. So if we were duplicating, trying to do the same thing as we did in the last for loop there, then I would say we want to do something while I is less than 100. And before that, we might have specified that I equals 1. And when we're inside the loop, we might say echo I, and then specify that I increase by 1 each time this thing runs. And this is going to do the exact same thing. All of this right here is going to do the exact same thing. And while is just expecting a condition. And that condition could be a number of different things. We'll see later on in the class that condition might simply be a data set returned from a database or something like that. Or it could be as long as I is does not equal a certain value. And then the value could be set in here if it finds a particular case that you're looking for. There's a lot of different things you can do, and this is basically 3 different ways that you can do that. The next thing we want to look at is if statements. They form the basis of just about any logic that you want to accomplish in PHP or any programming. So let's take a look at that. So the simplest if statement is just to use if. And we're going to say if food fruit equals peaches, then we'll do something. We'll echo out something like that. And in this case, since food fruit does equal peaches, it will echo out success. You'll notice that we're using 2 equal signs here, and that's saying that we're trying to compare it. You'll notice up here we're using a single equal sign. That means that we're assigning this array to become the value of food. Double equal sign equals a comparison, and a triple equal sign means that we're comparing types. And so we would say that the types have to exactly match. And we mentioned the different types being strings, Boolean, things like that. And so if you were trying to say true, which is Boolean, equals true, then setting this to equals would fail because the types are completely different. The same as if we said 1 equals 1, this would fail, whereas if we said, just as a basic comparison, it would actually, PHP would be able to recognize that they're the same and handle those. Let's jump back to this example. Now we've said if it does and we want to echo out success, we can also say else. And that's saying if it doesn't equal peaches, then we can specify what it needs to do in that case. In this case, we might say we want to echo out failure. You can also get a little more complex and say else if and put another comparison in. So I could say otherwise if fruit equals oranges, then echo out something different. If you're using else if, then you'd put that first, and then you could have your last condition be basically the fallback to say if none of these other conditions are met, then we're going to have one less fallback. I guess in this case we'd be saying failure to be a little more accurate. So we can have multiple conditions there, and we can test for different things and say, okay, if this is, if the value is this, we do one thing. If it's this, we do another. And of course, that forms a basis for logic in programming. If you're doing a very simple if-else statement, then you can break it down. You can use a shorthand called the ternary operator. And so I could actually say, let's go ahead and assign a value, but test, throw a test in there to change what value is being assigned. So I can say peaches equal, and then have a comparison test. And we could say if fresh equals, now of course we hadn't assigned a variable, but we're assuming that somewhere previous in our code there had been a variable assigned. And we'll say if fresh equals true, then otherwise. So all we're saying is here is our comparison. The question mark says, okay, after this are our two conditions, our two results. This result will be used if the comparison is true, and after the colon is the result that will be used if it's false. So you don't want to use it on a really complex if statement, but if you're just needing something very simple and very straightforward, then that can save a few lines of code. Another way you can do it is using a switch statement, a switch case, and you can come in and say, okay, peaches equal good. And then we say switch peaches. And within that switch, we're going to say case good. We're going to say the different values that we might be expecting, or bad. And most of the time we're going to put a break in here. So we're going to say everything in between here is what's going to happen if it's good. Otherwise, here's what's going to happen if it's bad. So we might echo something like that out. Another thing that we can do is add a default case in here. And that's going to be just like our else statement. It's going to be if all the rest of these conditions fail, then go ahead and echo out that one. And so we can come in and do something like that. Now switch has an interesting case here where we can actually come in and say if it matches either of these, to go ahead and run it. And so if I get rid of the break statement, what's going to happen is if it does equal good, then it's going to, if it does equal good, it's going to echo out eat it. It's also going to echo out throw it away, even though it doesn't match bad. Because what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, now start executing as long as the case is good. And since there's no break statement, it's going to keep executing things down here. So if it was bad, it would just echo out throw it away. If it was good, then it would echo out both. So sometimes that can be useful. Sometimes you can use it like this to actually stack multiple cases and say, okay, if it's good or bad, we'll say this. Otherwise, we say failure. Or you can use it to, compound multiple things.